we'll, just make it conversational. And I will welcome you, Marta. Biino, welcome to the Powerhouse Women Show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me as well.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you because I am so intrigued by the type of work that you get to do, and I love learning more about it. So, can we start with you talking a little bit about your current role and who you serve?
Yes, it is an intriguing role. I agree with you. And it's a very niche type of thing that I do still, I think. I'm a reporter, very old school type of reporting, just talking to people and writing stories. But I do it online for Insider, which is formerly Business Insider. Now it's just Insider. And yeah, so I'm a beat reporter, which basically means that I have an area of expertise. And my area of expertise is the creator economy, which we is also something that is very niche, and not a lot of people know what we mean when we say creator economy. That I think is also who I serve. It's a question that I think about a lot, and that we all think about a lot in terms of who our audience is and who do we write for. And what we've noticed is that a lot of creators and a lot of people in the space read our stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's always what I try to do. We try to be helpful and write things that not only are the news and like illustrate what's happening, but also try to help people in this industry navigate it, and people outside of it understand what it is and what it means.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of the creator economy, so for people who may be watching or watch this afterwards and not know what that is, can you talk a little bit about what is the creator economy,
Mhm.
and then we'll get into maybe some specifics.
Yes. So it's still a very, as I was saying, it's very niche, I think, and it's something that a lot of people ask me about. Even when I'm like when I meet someone new, and I moved recently to a new city, so that happens a lot. And I say I'm a creator economy reporter. People are like, look at me very perplexed and funny.
Mhm.
Um, and I also think creator economy is a very fluid term, which can mean different things to different people. What we on my team, I think, define as creator economy is the business of people who make money on social media and build careers on social media.
Mhm.
So that means people on Instagram, people on TikTok, people on YouTube, and how their career works and where their monetization comes from, and also the infrastructure around them. So how they're evolving into media companies, how they're evolving into becoming celebrities, and what the transition looks like.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's also a whole gray area, which we often find ourselves wondering, does this count as creator economy, or is this more the freelancer economy, which is basically the passion economy, the creative economy. So people who write newsletters, people who have blogs, people who don't necessarily make money from social media, people who have podcasts as well,
Mhm.
um, whose career maybe is not entirely on social media, but benefits from being on social media and is
Mhm.
definitely a creative endeavor.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something that I think is up for conversation and is something that I discuss with people around me all the time.
Mhm.
And that I always ask about, is this creator economy? Is this not?
Mhm.
Um, it's something that I think depends from person to person.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because if you think about the space, the creator economy space, and even if you just think about it as people who make a living off of social media using their social media following their that they've built, uh, it is incredibly disruptive to the way that we have done marketing and advertising up until now, right? It is, when I started in marketing and advertising, direct mail was one of the main channels that we
Mhm.
used. We were
Mhm.
doing, television spots and radio out of home, things like that. But what digital has emerged. It's been around for a while, but in particular, with the advent of people who are learning how to build a following that are basically their own media platforms. In some way, they've created these very large scale followings, many of them. And not only that, not only do they have the audience. So if you think about them as similar to maybe like cable TV network, and how many, similar, maybe similar size audience for some of them. If you think of that as similar, but on top of that, with creators, they're also they're making the content. So they
Yeah.
are so much more than even just the media. They are the content in addition to the media.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is so, as a person who started in marketing back in the day, I find that incredibly disruptive in a positive way, to the advertising and marketing industry. And I'm just curious if that is something that you've come across as you've been covering this space.
Yes, absolutely. That is something that we think about a lot. And that is also why something that I tell people all the time is to not underestimate how hard the job of the influencer or creator is.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not only the CEO of themselves, they're also they also create the content. Often
Mm-hmm.
they're their own managers and their own accountant. It's basically one person company. And obviously, a lot of the bigger ones that are more in the celebrity sphere have companies around themselves, but they're also the face of it and they're part of the content all the time. So that's definitely a really important factor. Um, and also the type of exposure that they have, because something that I wanted to talk about is also the type of connection that we feel with creators and with influencers.
Mm-hmm.
It's way more personal, the
Mm-hmm.
relationship that we have with someone who's on social media than a traditional celebrity. So
Mm-hmm.
that comes with a whole other host of like issues, I guess, and its positive sides, but also its burdens and its negative sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in thinking about one of the things, again, just going back to my roots is a marketer, and what when I thought about, and when we think about today, how do we market our products?
Mhm.
I think what sometimes the people who work at a brand, we can sometimes get very caught up in feature driven marketing. What I think creators and influencers do that is very unique for a marketer is that they think about a product from a benefit standpoint. They think about how, because they might be a consumer of this product themselves, and hopefully, if you're doing it well and you've hired a creator to do some content for you, you are finding someone who could be the target for that product,
Mhm.
not just them, but their audience, and what they're going to convey in their creation of content, which is really the marketing content. They are going to convey the benefits of that
Mhm.
product. How does that product or service going to make me smarter, make my life, make something faster, easier, whatever it is? That's what they're really going to focus on. And I think that in addition to the fact that they've built those more personal relationships, right? Their followers see them more personally. That, I think, the other reason that this creator content can be so compelling is because it is from the perspective of how their audience is going to think about it,
Yeah.
and not necessarily how somebody sitting in an office thinking about the many other things about that product are necessarily going to convey it. And in some ways, I think they can be much more effective, right, in terms of how they talk about the products and the services. The space has experienced, creator space has experienced really very rapid growth over the last few years. And I'm curious to hear what you think is really spurring that growth.
So I think at this point, it's kind of building on a momentum that it gained during the pandemic. I think the pandemic was probably the moment that ignited this growth, for on two sides, both on the creator side, because people were at home and they didn't have as many things to do as they used to, and they also craved that kind of connection, and so they had more time to get on social media and start creating content, and that's when TikTok really took off, at least in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, something that I recently discussed with someone who's in marketing is also, I think, on the marketing side, brands started investing more in creators and influencers as an advertising channel, because it was all online and they didn't need to hire production companies. They didn't need to go meet people in person. It was just something that could happen without any necessary physical contact. And I think the combination of two things definitely was what ignited this growth. And since then, it's just, and I don't know if it's because I'm in this space, but it's just realizing how rich it is and how much potential and possibility there is for people to build their own brand on social media, that has kept, like, it's basically a self-feeding cycle at this point, and I think a positive one.
Right. So it's built momentum, and we're kind of just feeding off of that momentum as do you see this continuing to grow over time?
Yes, absolutely. And I see this all the time. I'm constantly talking to creators whose brand and whose presence on social media is growing and growing just now. And I think it's because the internet is such a vast space. There is definitely room for people to succeed, and we as consumers of the content, as viewers, everyone likes different things, and we all want to relate to others. There's this sort of parasocial relationship that a lot of people think is negative, but I think also has its definitely positive aspects to it. So there is room to connect, and there is room to find people online that we love and whose content we enjoy, and there's room for people to create more content that others will enjoy, definitely, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of, though, some of the things that we are hearing, I mean, there are definitely headlines I've seen of people talking about the end of influencers, and how people, the de-influencing trend that is
Mhm.
happening. What is your perspective on how, given that we just said, you just mentioned that you do see that this is going to continue to grow? What is your perspective on when you see people talking about the end of influence, and this, and maybe particularly the de-influencing trend that's going on right now?
I have thought about it a lot, actually, and I've heard many different perspectives about it. The I think when we say, the way I see the term de-influencing is just an evolution of what we call influencing, and that's why we say creators, or I personally like the term creators more than influencer, because I think that the term influencer conjures an idea in your head of, like, someone who is just on social media to sell you stuff. um, and I think that's definitely changing. Like, users are becoming way more savvy to, like, which creators and influencers are just trying to sell stuff and make a quick buck, and those who actually try to be mindful about the products that they're trying to recommend. So I think the de-influencing trend is more about creators being more mindful that they can't just shove products into people's faces, rather than influencers dying completely, because obviously we're all on social media, we're all engaging with content constantly. So de-influencing is definitely not the death of the influencer, but just an evolution of it, from the marketing side, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an interesting point, because I think, what we have seen in our experience, if you are working with the right creator, if you are picking the right creator and matching them correctly with the product or the service, then that is the most important part of it, right? If
Mhm.
it's the right
Mhm.
influencer and right creator who can talk about the product credibly, and
Mhm.
and and actually is going to talk about it in a way that is compelling to their audience, but also authentic. I mean,
Mhm.
that's, I think, the thing. I think the trend that we need to be focused on is the authenticity trend, and
Mhm.
that users, followers, no longer have a tolerance for maybe stuff that they could have that a creator could have gotten away with before. It's really evolved. I mean, when we started in the creator space, when a lot of female creators were called mommy bloggers. I don't even know if
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
remember this
Of
trend from
course.
many years ago. That's when we were starting in the space. What
Mhm.
companies would do is they would say, we just want the creator to post this press release. That's
Mhm.
what we want them to do.
Mhm.
And it's so is if you think about the evolution of that, of how far brands have come with this feeling of that they are not going to be able to manage that much or that closely all of the things that they might have put in a press release, but
Mhm.
leaving it to the creator to put in their words, so that it is most authentic and compelling to their audience. I think you've seen this huge evolution of for brands in recognizing that that is actually a much more powerful place to be
Mhm.
than the days of, here's my press release. Can you just post this? Is that
Absolutely.
could you do that for more people?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how do you get ideas for your stories?
Um, so this is, I think, I think it's a mix. Um, Obviously, I spend a lot of time on social media, and just engaging with content, and just keeping my ears out. So doing it mindfully. So when I'm scrolling, I'm not just mindlessly scrolling, but trying to like understand what I'm seeing and what could turn into a story. But also as a beat reporter, I think something that I'm realizing now that I've been doing this for over a year, that a lot of this is just relationships,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
talking to people all the time, and
mhm,
not doing it always with an intention of it being transactional, but
mhm,
just being interested in what people are doing and checking in
mhm,
with them and asking them what they're up to. Um, and there was a time when I used to think, okay, maybe if I just sit with this person for an hour, it's going to be a waste of my time. But I realized that that's never the case.
mm,
Even just to build connections with people, regardless of stories, because
mm,
stories will then come.
mhm,
Um, and they often come when you have the most casual conversations, when you're not expecting to find a story.
mm.
Um,
Interesting. So it's curiosity. It's and I maybe that leads me into this next question I have, which is, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer, to be a journalist? Yeah, how did you get started? I guess is curiosity a big part of it for you?
Definitely. I think it's really hard to be a journalist without being curious, because part of being a journalist is always asking people questions,
Mhm,
and really listening to what they're telling you.
mhm,
Um, for the journalist question, the answer is no. I never always knew that I wanted to be a journalist, which, um, I think is different than a lot of journalists. A lot of journalists have this as a calling, since a very young age, since childhood. In my case, it was more something that I realized when I was in my late teens. I definitely grew up in a very bookish environment and household, and being surrounded by words. And I knew that
mhm,
I wanted to do something that was related to writing, but I
mm,
didn't know it was journalism necessarily.
mm,
And then I don't know what happened, but at one moment it just clicked. I wanted to be a translator for a long time and just work with languages.
mhm,
And then I realized that that was, maybe not really for me. I tried it for a bit and it just didn't work. And so I guess stories was what attracted me,
mhm,
and and that's how I got into journalism. And then I went to school for it, so that was
mhm,
kind of like a more traditional pathway into it. But yes, I think the curiosity is really what drives this type of job, because it's not something that comes from within you. It's something that comes from being interested in what other people have to say.
Yeah. Well, if you think about the skill that is the top skill that is required to be a good journalist, what do you think that is?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think it's probably empathy. And I don't know
Mm,
if that's a skill that any one person can learn. I think so, but I think it's also really just being able to relate to
mm,
others,
mhm.
and really being interested in their journeys.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it helps also that Insider is really focused on like profiles and writing
Mhm,
stories of individual people, which is one of my favorite formats.
mhm,
Because I really get to know people on a personal level when I write those kinds of stories, as opposed to just looking for a quote.
mhm. I love that. So it's interesting because I didn't expect you to say empathy. And but when you said it, I started thinking, of course. Of course you have to be able to understand where somebody's coming from, put yourself in their shoes even to be able to write the story in a compelling way, right? To tell a good story. I love that. When you think about, yourself and it's interesting because I we hear from so many women that they struggle with self-awareness, like being aware of why they're making decisions that they do, why they might be feeling a certain way in their day, but they recognize it's important. They know that it's important to understand what's going on with them, but they really struggle with it. And they want to be more purposeful in their decisions, right? Because it kind of we talk to women who tell us that they look back and they think, why did I make that decision? But had they been a little bit more conscious and self-aware, maybe they wouldn't have that, what they call the Monday morning quarterbacking. Like, why did I make that decision that I did, 5 years ago or whatever? And I'm curious, do you have any tips for how you think about self-awareness?
Um, I think one of the main things that I notice hinders my self awareness, and this is probably going to be counterintuitive, is spending too much time on social media. um,
Mm,
so, one thing that I always try to force myself to do is to not scroll mindlessly after I'm done with work,
mm,
and be more mindful of engaging with people in real life and just talking to people, especially my loved ones. I think just getting the feelings out really helps put them into perspective, and having
mm,
um, like looking at it from the outside instead of letting it boil inside of me without
mhm,
any outside perspective or someone who can give me a more lucid,
mhm,
I guess, opinion on what I'm
mhm,
thinking. That's definitely one thing. Um, and then also, gentle exercising helps a lot, and just walking outside and really trying
mm,
as much as I can, although I'm in London, so I can't as much as I wish, but like be in some kind of natural environment that
mhm,
helps with, again, having a more outside perspective and realizing that everything that one might be feeling is not necessarily as big and as
mhm.
catastrophic as it might seem in one moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I love that. It's when you were talking about going outside, I one of my favorite one of my favorite things I've learned how to do is changing my perspective when I'm stuck. If I'm stuck and if I have to write something and I just can't get it out, I have learned that if I pick myself up physically and move myself either
mhm.
to another room or to outside or to, someplace else, it's amazing for what that does for changing our perspective. And when you were talking, I was thinking to myself, that is what's coming through too, is that you have this ability to recognize that you need to change your perspective to get to understand something better. So I love that. I'm coming into one of my last questions for you.
Mhm.
What is the most useful piece of advice that you've received to date? What would you say that is?
Um, okay, so that is also a tough question. And I've thought about this a bunch, and I think something that helps with my work, but I think also helps in other parts of life, is something that one of my professors at university, when I went to journalism school, used to say. And it's funny because I didn't really like her at all at the time. I thought she was too strict. She was really demanding. Um, and her course was so stressful. But this course was about audio journalism, and so radio and podcasting. And basically, the whole premise of it was that we would have to produce a radio show in like 5-6 hours, like for
Mm,
reporting, like putting it all together, mixing the sound and everything, and then putting it on the air. And what she used to say was, "We make air, not art,"
mm,
um, which, as a perfectionist, I really think about that a lot.
mm,
Um, as in, not everything needs to be the most perfect thing that you will ever do.
mm,
Sometimes you need to get stuff done,
mhm,
and not beat yourself up if it's not exactly the way you wanted it to be, because otherwise you end up being stuck.
mhm.
Uh, and so, yeah, that is something that I think about often, like just
Yeah.
get things done without dwelling on them too much.
Well, and also maybe there's a recognition there that by virtue of putting it out, you're going to learn something that then informs the next thing you do that
Hmm.
you take with you. It's not that, and that's part of the process. It's not just about having something be perfect, as much as you think it needs to be, and then putting it out. But part of that process for us as human beings is to put something out, see what comes back, and that being part of the whole process of growing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's definitely something that in that course specifically we learned so well, because the deadline was really tight, and it really taught you to just let go. And because you have to do this every day, and it's something that also for work it happens a lot, you have on, often have to do the same thing every day,
Yep.
so you will get better at it, you will improve. um, and mistakes happen all the
Yeah.
time, and it's just a
Mhm.
matter of accepting them and learning from them.
Yeah. And learning that they're not fatal.
Yeah.
Mistakes happen and they're not fatal, right?
Yeah.
Failure is not fatal.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's also something that I'm always, every time I make a mistake, I'm like, this is it. This is the
Mm.
worst thing I've ever done. I'm never gonna recover.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that also comes with being, gaining experience and growing up and maturing as a person,
Yeah.
and learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Marta Biino, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I am so grateful for you sharing your insights and your experience and your story. So thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun, and I really appreciate